Security Halt podcast. Let's go.
You're dealing with an expert in guerrilla warfare. With a man who's the best. With guns, with knives, with his bare hands. A man who's been trained to ignore pain, ignore weather, to live off the land. Job was to dispose of enemy personnel. To kill. Period. Win by attrition.
Right. Jim Sisco, welcome to Security Halt, man. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing well, brother. It's a pleasure to have you on. Always love connecting with our veterans that are authors and have unique and remarkable stories. And you fit all those categories, man.
I don't know about that. I would say unique is definitely a good way to describe my career and what I'm doing, but I'm just a humble guy.
Absolutely, man. It's shout out to every veteran out there that's humble and thinks of their service as something that was a calling. But we should always remember that it's important to write our stories. It's important to get our lived experience out there, and that's how for a vast majority of us, how we entered the service, through reading those stories, reading those books of men that were greater than us. And I'm proud to have you on the show to share your story. Not just a book, but your life in general, man. Because one thing that we tend to think is that once you make it on the outside, it's gravy, it's easy. And oftentimes that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, funny story before we start. Last night was yesterday was Veterans Day. Last night I went to Applebee's and I sat down by myself and, to get my free veterans meal. And this guy sat down next to me and we just started talking and found out that he was West Point grad and IT cyber guy and got out and has his own company. But we sat there and talked for almost an hour and a half. And, it was great for me. When veterans get together, they're able to share, stories and have these common, experiences and things like that. It really sets us apart. And, when we got done, I talked about the things I did in Desert Storm and the book and my podcast and what I did in Afghanistan. And when I got done, before we left, he said, "You had an amazing career." And it kind of sunk in. I'm like, I thought about it today, and I had an amazing career. And I was very fortunate for my time in the Marine Corps and my time in the Navy and what I learned and then writing the book and doing the podcast. And, it kind of was invigorating for me. So I did a podcast this morning for the War Journal and look forward to doing our podcast because I always have so much respect for the people who were World War I, World War II, and the Frozen shows and things like that. I can never compare my life and career, what they experienced and did. But my story, I believe, is powerful. And I think that people it'll resonate with people. And that's my hope. And I hope that your listeners will learn something from it and get something from it.
Absolutely, man. So let's dive in, man. How did Jim find himself in the Marine Corps?
Oh, wow. Just troubled childhood where I didn't have any direction and really didn't do well in school. Pretty much a family unit that wasn't intact. My father was married 3 times, my mom 4 times, and I didn't do well in school. I was told that, hey, you're going to join the union and work on the back of a garbage truck. And so the Marine Corps was an avenue for me to really kind of challenge myself. I wanted to go into special forces and I really never applied myself in school. And that was my first opportunity.
Yeah, that's a common thread that we share with so many of our veterans. I found myself in that same spot. The small towns and cities we come up from, they don't offer us much. And oftentimes our families are chaotic and we don't have that mentor, we don't have that family member that's there to give us a way out of our environment. So the military is this shiny, bright beacon. And you take it back to the Marine Corps commercials that you probably grew up with and that we now see that are old, the Dragon Slayer, killing the lava monster, those commercials, and the armies as well, the Be All You Can Be, those campaigns that made it seem like even a small kid from this podunk town can make it into something bigger than themselves. And then we enlist and we find that we've got a lot of growing up to do.
You find out that it's not like the commercials at all.
Yeah. No dragons.
Well, they are, but they're in the form of like senior NCOs and
Yes.
junior officers.
Yeah. So what was it like as a young Marine?
Awesome. I mean, for me, it was 1986. It was obviously society was a lot different back then. I came
Oh, yeah.
from New Jersey, go down to North Carolina, and took the reconning dock and passed. And all of a sudden, I show up on Onslow Beach. They come to infantry training school, pick us up in a Humvee, throw our sea bags in the back, and I remember checking into Second Recon Battalion, and it was isolated. We're out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, 10 miles away from main side. We have our own barracks, chow hall, everything, and we're really isolated. And it was the Wild West back then. I mean, there was hazing, and I remember vividly the Humvee dropping us off, throwing the sea bags out in front of headquarters company, and we go and check in. And we're like, "You're going to Charlie Company." And there's 4 of us, and there was a sergeant major, our first sergeant Capper. He was the first sergeant for Charlie Company, and he was on a Marine Corps recruiting poster. Bald-headed guy, huge, looked like Mr. Clean from the TV commercials, and literally he's standing outside the headquarters company, and he goes, "Grab your shit and follow me." And he like takes off to Charlie Company, which was at the end. And we're like grabbing sea bags and trying to run and keep up with him. And we get down there, and he's like, "Throw your shit on the, in the barracks." And he's like, goes into his office, and we have to go to the NCO desk, and they're like, "Get in there." And we're just standing there at the position of attention, kind of like in shock. We don't know what's happening. And I don't hear a word out of his mouth. And he's sitting behind a desk like this. And he's just like, and he just jumps out of his chair and jumps on the desk. And he goes, "Get down." And we're just sitting there in shock. And like, what? And he's like, "Push." And we just start doing push-ups. I must have been like 120 push-ups in and sweat, and you're in your Charlies, and it was just like, what is going on? And that was kind of, oh, wow, my book just fell. Anyway, that was kind of we got another one. That was kind of the initial experience, and that was what we dealt with for the first month and a half at Recon. Being dogged out every night, NCOs coming in drunk and just hazing you. Remember screaming in a mirror for like 20 minutes straight, "I'm not crazy, you are. I'm not crazy." And they're yelling at you, "Convince him, convince him." So it was different. It was a lot different. Fun things, memorable experiences, but just really hard too. When you're doing that for a prolonged period of time, and then ship out to ARS, and then everything changed.
Yeah. It's funny. We often have the same, like we hear these stories of like what it was like in the 80s for both the Marine Corps and the Army. And we have to remember, like, there wasn't a war, or at least there wasn't a consistent war. So things were different. Personalities were different. And in your experience, looking back at those years before there was conflict, like how crazy was that compared to, and I think it's even crazier. I think it's more crazy when there isn't a conflict and you have a lot of guys that have been doing nothing but training and training and training. That's when things get completely chaotic.
Yeah. So imagine this, the war in Beirut bombing had happened, and we had 4 Marines who were involved in that, and Sergeant Arroyo was one of them. And I remember the first time I met him, I was only in recon for I don't know, a month. He just got off a deployment, and he had all his upper teeth were fake. He got blown out of the barracks, and he was lucky to survive. But and he came in, and he was just like a little, really small guy, but huge in presence, and literally took his teeth out. I'm like, "Rah!" And so you're right. It was totally different. We're training and going on exercises and deployments, but there's so much downtime and so much you know, aside from the training, I remember IG inspections and just bullshit, and that was the environment.
So,
So, we would be training, doing exercises, going out and partying, but there really was nothing, with regard to war and combat, like the op tempo that
yeah,
I faced later on in my career that many, soldiers and Marines face, in the past 2 decades.
yeah. And that's a great thing to be able to dissect your story and the stories of countless veterans from that period in time. There was that chaos of nothing but training and training and training, and the shift that almost happens instantaneously when something gets spun up. Oh shit! Now it's real.
Yeah.
Now you're a recon Marine, and you're getting orders to go to war.
Yeah. Well, that was a really funny story. I mean, so I had gone almost my entire 4 years, and I did a couple deployments, med floats, cold weather training, exercises in Central America. Anyway, and what happened was I'm getting ready to get out of the Marine Corps, and I already have plans. I'm going to go to college, and I had my checkout sheet in my hand, and I had already turned in all my gear, and literally I go into the sergeant major and the battalion commander, and that's my last thing on the checkout sheet. And Sergeant Major's like, "Hey, Corporal Sisco," and by that time I had established a very good reputation within Second Recon Battalion as being one of the best operators, technically proficient, hard, but kind of a fuck up, out on liberty and always getting in trouble. But that was my nature.
Yeah.
And so I go in, Sergeant Major's like, "Hey, Corporal Sisco, go on in. Boss wants to talk to you." And I remember, like, we would have these big deployment or big battalion operations, and how you have a hot wash afterwards, and like the comms, what did you get? Oh, everything's great, sir. Hey, S2, what about you? Oh yeah, we had a great time. Ops, what do you? Oh, the operation went great. And he'd look over and be like, "Hey, Corporal Cisco, what did you think?" And I go, "Hey, sir, I don't know what exercise these guys were on. It was totally fucked up. These guys didn't do this. We didn't have our cons." And it turned into a huge, like, pointing contest. But so he always knew that he could get ground truth from me, but not in a way, I brought it in an intellectual way, not in a, they all suck and this is fucked up. So I walk into his office, he goes, "Sit down, Jim." And I'm like, he goes, "Listen, I'm just going to get straight to the point. I got some good news and bad news. What do you want first?" And I was like, "Give me the bad news, sir." And he said, "The Marine Corps has ended all EAOSs at this point. You have been involuntarily extended for the needs of the Marine Corps." I go, what does that mean?" And he goes, "Desert Storm's kicking off. You're not getting out." And I'm like, "Okay, what's the good news?" And he said, "The good news is, because you're in the position you're in, I'm going to allow you to make a decision. You can either go to headquarters, you can go to a different company, or you go back to Charlie Company." And I'm like, "Sir, I'm going back to Charlie Company, and I want my team back," because I was a team leader. And he's like, "All right, go get your check, take that checkout sheet, go get a check-in sheet, and get back to the company," which was great. I had trained for 4 years to go to combat, and that was my opportunity. I wasn't going to squander that and go to headquarters to, be in the headquarters platoon. So I got my dream and didn't get my platoon back, and that's a different story, but I was heading to Desert Storm.
Yeah. And that's for the audience out there that may not have served. They hear the idea, like, I was going to war. I was going to, like, that was my dream. Like, that's a hard thing to explain to people. Even some service members, it's a hard thing to explain to, like, you train and you train and you train and you practice. And it's almost like a perpetual state of Thursday night practice, waiting for Friday night lights, waiting for football. And it's ingrained in us because a vast majority of us were athletes before we went in the military. So that desire to actually prove your mettle in combat, it's a needed thing. But at the same time, you have to be able to speak to those. Nowadays, I would imagine it's a double-edged sword. You got guys that are so so eager to go to combat. And I dealt with it too, seeing young guys come to a team and be like, I just want to go to combat. It's like, wait, hold up a second. You need to master your task. You need to know your
Yeah.
job. But in your case, you had mastered your job. You had been at this. You are now somebody that's like, okay, finally, it's game night. Going back and let us know what happened, because you have to at some point have a little bit of the idea of like, okay, everything's going to pan out. I'm going to go back. It's going to be perfect. I'm going to get my team back. Then you show back up with this brand new, revelation and news to your organization. How did they take that? What was how did that unfold?
Well, it was weird because the platoon was going through some changes. We had just done a deployment, so we're post-deployment, so guys are getting out. There's a huge turnover. New staff NCOs are coming in. New team leaders are being assigned. So I go back and, everything is in disarray. And now it's, we got to get ready. We got to have an embark. We got to do this, that. We're sending me off to celestial navigation school to learn how to navigate off the stars with a sextant, training for desert environment, which we never have done in the past, doing mobile reconnaissance with Humvees. And so there's this huge build up and training and in a very compressed period of time. And so nothing really got straightened out. And we head over to Desert Storm, and I'm still not a team leader, and the teams are still kind of screwed up. There's a brand new lieutenant, a brand new staff NCO. I mean, so it's not a well-oiled machine and not functioning well. But I want to go back to something that you said previously that really resonated with me. I had tried my entire life up to that point to prove myself to everyone, my family, my father, my mother, everyone who told me I couldn't do anything. And first going into Marine Special Forces and reconnaissance, I proved that to myself. But I think going to combat was proving that I was technically proficient. I could lead, and it would prove to everybody, every doubter that didn't believe in me. So, but then we ship off to Desert Storm, and we arrive in Saudi Arabia, and it's just everything changes.
Yeah. Desert Storm was this operation that was initially, people were thinking we were going to have casualties by the thousands. We were going to have this chaos of war, that they literally had this idea that we weren't going to have enough resources and mortuary affairs individuals to take care of our own dead. They were planning for just large scale combat, man to man on the ground. But what our soldiers, Marines encountered when they got there was not so much. It was not the warfare that we had thought we were going to be getting into.
Well, I write about that in my book, probably one of the first journal entries. And I can remember that in the news, Iraq had been fighting with Iran. And this is we don't teach kids history in school. And Desert Storm, I tell people I'm in Desert Storm, what was that? And I'm like, never mind. But anyway, Iraq had been fighting Iran for decades. And Iraq had the third largest army in the world, ground forces. They had thousands of tanks and APCs. Plus, they also used mustard gas and nerve agents against Iran.
Yep.
So that was the threat. And if you in the book, I have pictures of me in my MOP gear and MOP level 4 with the gas mask and the rubber gloves and rubber booties. I mean, so we were preparing for that. And that was the narrative, is that we're going to be in this long projected campaign that could last for months and years, and that we had to build up all of our resources, and we're shipping over tanks, and there's 82nd Airborne and Marines and 1st Marine Division. So we're going thinking that this is going to be huge. To the surprise of everyone, the war lasted 96 hours, but we'll talk about that later. I think there's things that we talked about getting up to that.
Yeah. So you get on the ground, and what was that like? Because you're right. A vast majority of our American public don't remember, and they don't know anything about Desert Storm. It was a blip. And we get frustrated when they don't understand Afghanistan and Iraq, and people are, now for 20 years, they just think, oh, Iraq was just, enduring operation. They don't even know the difference between enduring freedom and the OEF. And it's frustrating for us. And I can completely understand the frustration for you when you're like, hey, like we had conflict there before this 20-year war. What was it like when you sat and you actually got on the ground there?
Yeah, well, let me say this before I answer your question. For me, I have really good perspective because not only was I in Desert Storm, but I was did three tours in Afghanistan, and I did deployments to Iraq. So I've experienced, in my 30-year career, the full spectrum of war and how it changed. The whole continuum of war has changed. But to answer your question, I get on the ground, and we're in this huge staging area in Saudi Arabia, and there was like three: Camp 5, Camp 15, and so it's just a thriving metropolis. It's a huge city and tents everywhere, and these Connex boxes just all over the place, and they have chow halls, and but not chow halls like in Afghanistan or Iraq with the 5-star cheesecake. How many desserts do you want? You're like, is it lobster night or crab legs tonight? You're like, what?
That's
Yeah,
true.
so it was totally different than that. But here we are stuck in this huge, uh, metropolis in the desert. And it was very uncomfortable for me because I didn't want to be there. I thought that was a threat. If there was going to be they were going to attack, you're a sitting duck. I was
Yeah.
I love being out in the woods and in the water, and, where you have your autonomy and freedom and you can operate and scoot and shoot and maneuver. And I hated being there. And it was boring because you can't train, you couldn't do anything. And we were, I remember sitting there for hours having scorpion fights. We'd put 2 scorpions in a ammo can and see who would win and bet on it, playing spades and kill how many flies you can kill in a day. I think the record was 200 and some, but so it was terrible. And I hated it. And, but the good news was, we could have some creature comforts. You can go to Chow Hall and you have one phone center where people would line up for hours to get on the phone for like 5 minutes at the USO and talk to home. Remember, we're still writing letters. These are actual letters that I wrote to my dad and he kept. So you're writing letters home. And so it's hard for people today to imagine that. They don't have their cell phone and texting people, hey, man.
Yeah.
So, but we were in this big, city, tent city, and I wasn't comfortable there.
Yeah. It's funny you brought up the letters. I still remember in like my first deployment to Iraq, that was a real thing. People still wrote. People still went and made the effort to write. And then lo and behold, just a few years, just a decade plus, and it's all email. It's all cell phone. Like soft guys still have a cell phone. They're able to call back and send messages back home through Wi-Fi. And it's crazy to think like that's just something that few people experience and will experience moving forward as we continue to advance in warfare. Now it's not waiting weeks and months for a reply from somebody. It's instantaneous. But it's also important to remember war isn't like Black Hawk Down.
No.
War isn't like the Hollywood version of it. It's long periods of absolute mundane, mind-numbing nothing, unless you're part of the leadership and you're constantly doing work and putting out products. But for the majority of our guys and gals, there's a lot of waiting and a lot of mundane stuff that happens.
Yeah, I agree. Not only in Desert Storm, and like in my book, I talk about it. Before we get to that 96 hours of combat, you have all of this building up.
Yeah.
And you can see how it weighs on people psychologically, emotionally, physically. So let me kind of add to that. We finally leave Camp 15, and we are going to be the lead element for 2nd Marine Division. So we stage north, and we are off the border of Kuwait. And for a couple months prior to the war, we're bouncing around, we're doing ops, we're training, but we're constantly moving. So that keeps your op tempo really high, but you have this unknown, when are we going in? We don't have intel, we don't have a good understanding of enemy disposition, anything. And we're still trying to learn how to fight in the desert. Like our first patrols were on foot, trying to carry 50 cals and running around. You're like, what are we doing? And then finally we're mounting the 50 cals and the Mark 19s on the Humvees, just jury rigging stuff. First time we have pluggers, it was the initial, GPS systems, and they were huge, not like on your phone. Hey, put Waze in, let's go to your girlfriend's house, it's like but anyway,
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure all that stuff out, and I'm still not in the team. I'm still like in a team, but I don't have my own team. I'm bouncing around. I'm trying to teach classes on patrolling. I'm trying to, kind of give my knowledge and insights and be a contributing member, and I'm still not allowed. So I'm very frustrated.
Yeah, that's not good for anybody, especially in a combat environment where you don't have a set role, where you don't have like a set, like this is taking ownership, having that ability to sit down and be like, this is my team, this is what I'm responsible for. And then you have to tiptoe or feel like you're getting involved in somebody's lane. Did the guys ever share any frustration, or were they understanding of your unique situation?
I had advocates who were trying to get me into different roles. I even had guys from different platoons, leadership going, hey, we'll take him. You guys don't want him? We'll take him. He's awesome. Let's hear it. So, yeah, I had that. It was just the whole politics. Even in combat, I saw that there's still politics being played. And that was disheartening for me, because I thought I could understand and be frustrated in prior to combat, but I thought once we go to combat, everything's going to be like moving like smooth as silk, and it didn't, and it was actually more effed up. But which is funny stories. I'll tell one. I have a couple, but I'll tell one. We're putting in requests for ammunition. Laws, AT4s, claymores, hand grenades, and, the lieutenant's like, oh, well, I can't do it. So I'm like, fuck it. So one day I grabbed this ATL and my assistant team leader, from this, from the platoon. And I'm like, come on. He's like, what are we doing? I go, get in the Humvee. We're going to go back to Camp 15. So I go back to Camp 15. It was like a 4-hour drive back by ourselves. Didn't even tell anybody. This is how I was like a maverick. I mean, I really was. And, we get back there and we go into huge base again. We're driving around. We're like, where the hell's the ammo depot? And so we finally see it, and I go, hey, just pull the Humvee right here. And he says, what are you gonna do? I go, I don't know yet. I'm just going in. So we didn't wear camis, traditional camis. We wore the chocolate chip camis, these, but we in recon had these hoodies, and they were chocolate chip, and they didn't have rank on them. And I had a holster like this, black holster, and I had my 9mm. And most of the officers have, pistols.
Yep.
And I had my M16 A2 service rifle. I left that in Humvee. And I walk in, and there's this huge desk, and there's this gunnery sergeant. He's talking to like another staff sergeant or something. And I'm just standing there by myself for like a couple seconds, maybe a minute goes by, and they're just jaw jacking. And finally I just go, hey, Gunny, can I fucking get some help here? And he like looks at me, and he sees the pistol, and he comes running. Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I'm sorry, sir. What do you need? And I'm like, I got my driver outside. I'm 10 miles off the border. We need some ammunition. Can you help me out? He said, oh, I'm sorry, sir. Have your driver come around and pull back here. So we just load up the Humvee. We got just cases of claymores and 18-4s and 5.56 Mark 19 rounds, 50 cal rounds. We're like, it was Christmas. So what happens is I'm like, hey, driver, come on. We pack everything up, and I'm getting ready to leave. He goes, oh, hey, sir, before you leave, I need you to sign for all this stuff. And I'm like, uh-oh. So I'm like, okay, yeah. So he comes over, he has this big sheet. So he goes, does that look good? I'm like, yeah. He's like, so I signed my lieutenant's name, Lieutenant Russ. Here you go. We leave. So we're on the drive back, and we also stopped at the BX and got some food and stuff. But so we're all fat, dumb, and happy. I'm like chewing tobacco, smoking cigarettes, we're drinking Coke and having fun. We're like, oh shit, what are we gonna do when we get back? I'm like, all right. So we get back, and I'm like, hey, just park the Humvee here. And I go and I grab the team leaders. I'm like, hey man, get over here, get your shit, and get your vehicle. So all of a sudden we go out away from the headquarters, and it's like Christmas, man. We're just like guys are like, here's some more claymores here. Hey, oh I need that. Anyway, the company gunny comes over. And this guy, in the story in the book, you'll see him and I were like this the whole time. He's like, what's going on here? And everybody's like, the PFC salute. I don't know. And I didn't want anybody else to get in trouble. I'm like, yeah, I did that. That's me. He's like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, sir, or hey, Gunny, I went back to Camp 15. He's like, oh, come with me. We're coming to see the lieutenant. And I'm like, all right, whatever. So brings me to the lieutenant, tells the lieutenant. Lieutenant's like, you're coming with me. We're going to see the CO. And I'm like, all right. And the CO, like I said, was really cool with me. Had a great rapport. We're at a lot of respect, mutual respect. And the lieutenant's like, oh, I got you. I'm going to get you. He was a Citadel grad.
Yeah.
Total dork. And he tells the CO, he's like, so let me get this straight. Corporal Sisco, you took a Humvee by yourself, drove 4.5 hours to Camp 15, got all this ammunition on your own, and then drove back. I'm like, yes, sir. He goes, that's pretty damn good. How'd you wind up doing that? I was like, well, sir, we were asking Lieutenant, and he said, and he goes, all right, well, I just have one question. Who signed for all this stuff? And I just looked at him and I point to Lieutenant, I go, he did, sir. And he goes, get the fuck out of here. So that, in the book, I talk about how the lieutenant and I, at that point, and the gunnery sergeant and I were like this the whole time. And they actually tried to write me up for NJP for having alcohol. They caught me with Jack Daniels. They caught me with intel that I got from another Marine who was back at Camp 15 who I dated and actually got into a relationship with in Desert Storm. So Desert Storm for me was wild.
To say the least. So after that, those awesome stories of just trying to get prepared, trying to get things going, when it finally kicks off, where did you find yourself?
So I will tell you this, that I have, and this will be etched in my memory forever. It was one day before the ground war started, and we had just done an exercise, and I had stayed back, and I was on the comms team because I wasn't assigned to a team yet. And the teams had gone out, and this is Charlie Company, the guys who I knew and I trained with, and they came back off a mission, and we're sitting in we're sitting in a circle, and we're just chilling out, eating, reading mail, and hanging out. And I'm sitting there with 5 guys, and the guy next to me is Corporal Michael Cook. And Mike and we train together, we're friends, we hang out, go partying together. And I remember Lance Corporal Stroud was about 20 feet away, 30 feet away by the Humvee, and he was playing with the radios. And he goes, hey, Corporal Sisco, can you help me with the KY gear? And I go, fuck you. Were you a retard? You know how Marines are.
Yeah.
And everybody started laughing, like, oh, retard. And Mike looks over at me and he goes, bad dog. And I go, yeah, it was kind of a dick move. And so I'm like, I'll go help him. So I go walk over and I start helping him with the radio. And I'm over there for maybe less than a minute, maybe a minute or, not too long at all. And I hear this loud explosion. Boom. Like, what the fuck? And it came from where I was just at, where I was sitting. And so I just go running over. First instinct, that's me, just go run. What the fuck happened? And I run over to where the sound came from, where I was sitting. And Mike had his 782 gear on, and he was taking his 782 gear off. And when we went on patrol, we would take the thumb clips off the hand grenades, and we would loosen up the pins so it's easier to pull. And supposedly, well, nobody really knows, but when he took the 782 gear off, I think the pin got caught, and it came off, and it fell down between his legs, and he went to go grab it when the hand grenade went off. So I am standing there looking at Mike. Both arms are gone. And it's not like the movies. There's no blood and guts. The heat is so intense that it just burns everything. So everything is black and charred, and like his camis are ripped and his leg was just hanging there and both arms are gone. And I'm just looking at him like, what the fuck? And I have my training. I can do trachs and IVs and CPR. And I just knew he was dead. His head like kind of slumped down and it was over. Corpsman knocked me out of the way and they started working on him. And within a couple of minutes, there's a CH-46 and they medevac him out with the guys who got shrapnel. They got fragged. And, that's the day before the ground war started. So the story gets worse. And you were going to say, how can the story get worse? Well, I'm glad you asked. When somebody dies in combat, you have to go through their personal effects and their military gear, and you separate them because the personal effects will go home.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I volunteered. I'm like, you know what? I'll do it. Maybe it was because I could have been next to him. I might have been dead, or maybe because we were friends for that long. Not close friends, but we were good friends. And I started going through all his gear and I'm separating stuff. And I literally remember, I'm wiping pieces of flesh and bone and black charred powder camis like off of some of the gear. And my hands are like, with, black and with all this charred stuff. And, anyway. And I get to his wallet, which is in the bottom of his pack. And I'm like, one Pennsylvania driver's license, one social security card, $26. And you have to write everything down on paper. And there's like a staff sergeant who was over on the side. He was just watching me do it. He didn't want to get involved. And so I reach into one of the billfold pockets in the wallet and I pull out a picture and I look at it because I'm like, not paying attention. I look at it and I'm like, what the hell? And it was a picture of my girlfriend.
Oh, fuck.
And I turned it over and it has like a heart and says, love, Ashley. And at that moment in my life, I had felt emotions that I wish no one ever would ever feel. Death and betrayal were mixed together in a way that I could feel my heart rate just going nuts. I started breathing. I took a knee. I was like, what the fuck? I didn't know what to do. The staff sergeant looked at me and said, you okay? And typical Marine, yeah, I'm good. Got it. Just typical man. I'm good. Yeah. No, I'm okay. And I'm like, just give me a sec. And I walked out into the desert. I just was like, get your fucking shit together. I went back and finished doing what I had to do and was kind of unnerved and went back to my little hooch underground, little, in the sand and started drinking and smoking some cigarettes and drank almost a half a canteen of Jack Daniels. And to the point where I got up with my 9mm and went to Kuntz's hole and pulled my fucking gun out. I was like, you fucking tell me right now. And he's like, what are you doing? It was terrible. I'm like, fucking tell me. And he knew, and a couple other people knew. And so that was like shit. And I remember I went to bed, and then the next day we were the lead element for the ground invasion. So the good news is I didn't have time to dwell on much. I was immediately assigned to a team. I had the responsibility of a team, and I had to mission plan, and I had to execute. So I learned how to compartmentalize. And that's
I was just going to say, you took all that and just stuffed it right down to the bottom of that sea bag.
Yeah. Yep. And I wrote it in the book. This is the actual journal I wrote when I was in Desert Storm.
Oh, wow.
And that was what the war journal book is. It's my actual journal entries, and I wrote it in there. And so next day we're ground invasion, and here's the redemption in a way. I'm on the back of the Humvee, standing behind the 50 cal. We are driving up to the border where the breach site is, and there's Marines just like in columns and rows of you standing there, and APCs and tanks and Humvees, and these Marines are in MOP level 2 and 3, and And I'm on the back of a Humvee behind the 50 cal with a green cravat bandana on my head, in my boots with my Mop Level 4 pants and a t-shirt. And we are playing Guns N' Roses, Welcome to the Jungle. And we have a big American flag on the back of the whip antenna. And we're just driving by all these Marines and they see us and they just start screaming, hoorah. And it was just hilarious. You know, for me, at that point, I did not give a shit. I had no shits to give. And I had a sense, and from the time I got there, that I would be okay. I knew that. I just knew that I would come out of it okay. So we pull up to the breach site and everybody's just like, what the fuck are you doing? And I'm like, we're going to do this. But if you want to ask anything, and then if you want, I'll tell you about the breach, because that was really cool too. And then we can talk about some of the other stuff.
Yeah. And I want to time travel a little bit and reflect on this moment you just shared with us. You go through something that is so painful. You lose a brother. And then not even 48 hours, not even 24 hours, just a few hours later, you're going through his stuff and you find the ultimate betrayal. Like, how did you unpack that later on in life? How did you begin to unpack that? Like,
so no, this is, remember when we talked, prior to the podcast, and we didn't script anything. We just talked about our experiences and what we were going to talk about. We said, let's just keep it open. I didn't ever unpack anything from my childhood. I didn't ever unpack anything from Desert Storm. I didn't ever unpack anything from my military experience in the Navy and my combat tours there until I was going through a divorce and I lost custody of my kids. And at that point, everything fell apart. It was the darkest period of my life. You talk about that pain that I felt at that moment, magnify that by 10 and prolong it for years. And that's what happened. And that's why I wrote the book, because I pulled this journal off of my bookshelf and started reading it, because I hadn't read it in 20 something years. And when I got done, I was like, holy shit, why didn't I fucking read this throughout my life? If I had read that book, if I had read that journal at different points in my life, it would have saved me so much pain and so many bad mistakes. And that's why I wrote the book, because if you read it, it can help you and help anyone not make the mistakes that I made.
Yeah. I think one of the main issues that we as service members and veterans, we walk away from combat, walk away from Afghanistan, walk away from Iraq, and we tend to think, I made it. I survived. I don't have to do any internal work. I made it. Awesome. It's not the truth. Oftentimes, we lived through a lot of chaotic shit before we went into the military. And then we continue to add more traumatic events. When you find yourself going through transition, or you're about to transition out of the military, if you haven't done the work to sit down and speak with somebody or get help in putting things into perspective, things that you've gone through, now's the time. Do it now before you walk out into your next chapter. The things we do in combat aren't normal. We have to do a lot of fucked up things. And I would, like I said before, and I always talk about, our generation of service members, the vast majority of us went through some traumatic and horrible things before we got in. And then we added more stuff on top. And that rucksack gets really heavy, man. It gets really, really heavy. Take a knee, offload some of that. Get plugged in with some resources. We share a whole bunch of them on this show. Here's a couple right now, 22-0. Be able to reach out to anybody, and I'll put the link there on the episode description. Be willing to connect with somebody. Hell, even if you don't do it through the military, go to BetterHelp. online resources, in-person resources, whatever it takes to get you back to the best version of yourself, it's worth the fight. And
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. The problem for me was when I got out of Desert Storm, I was back in the United States, and 7 days later, I was out of the Marine Corps. In 1991, there were no resources.
Yeah.
After my first combat tour in Afghanistan, when I came back out of my 3, there was still not a lot of resources, but a little more. And by the time I finished my last combat tour in Afghanistan, there were more resources, but they still weren't, touching on the mental health issues. It was more on the physical, on the emotional, psychological. So when I departed the military, 13 years ago, the infrastructure wasn't there. The resources weren't there like they are today. So once again, I was just like, compartmentalize everything, just pack it away. I'll deal with it. And I think I would have dealt with it if I didn't have to go through the custody stuff and losing my children. So I do share your opinion and believe that everyone should utilize every resource available. And the mentality, and especially in the special forces community, that you can do it alone or, it's not a good one. Being a man, like, I can deal with this. Okay, I know you can, but it's easier when you have a buddy by your side or you have some
absolutely
supporting you.
That what you just said has killed so many of us. I'm a man, I can get through this. Yeah, tons of friends have said that, and they've tried to John Wayne that shit. And sadly, a lot of them aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
Like, that is so true, man. In your journey right now, having gone through what you shared with us is the most painful thing ever. Losing your family, losing your kids. How are you navigating that? How are you putting
day by day?
Day by day, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on talking about what's happening with my personal life and my in the custody trial, but I'm just going to say that imagine this: 23-year veteran, business owner, husband for 11 years, and wife decides that she wants a divorce because she's not happy. She gives me custody of 2 of the 3 children. So I'm raising 2 of my kids by myself during COVID. And, being a great dad, coaching their rugby team, going to the gym before they wake up in the morning, taking them to school, helping them with homework, taking them to doctor's appointment, taking them to rugby practice, being a dad, and loved it. Best year of my life. I connected with my children in a way that I wish that every parent or father would connect with their children. We would go for daily walks around the lake. I'd talk to them about life and share knowledge and insights with them. Go to court. And if anybody's been through the family court system, it is just a nightmare. And dealing with lawyers and therapists and this and that, and not prepared. And I will say this: I was prepared for combat. I had trained. I was hard as woodpecker lips. I went to the family court system and just got destroyed.
Yeah.
And I represent myself pro se. I go in front of a judge, and I think it's a slam dunk. He's going to give me all 3 kids. My ex-wife is batshit crazy in a way. She gives me the custody of the kids. My youngest daughter, who was in my wife's care, threatens to commit suicide. How am I not going to win? The judge, whose own daughter was murdered by her male college roommate, he rules that I alienated the kids from their mother, gives my ex-wife full legal custody, and limits my interaction with my kids to 30-minute Skype calls on Sunday evenings. How does that happen? And that's what I've been dealing with for 3 years. So when you ask me, how am I dealing with this? Day by day. And it has been the biggest struggle for me. The irony of Veterans Day for me is last year on Veterans Day, I played in a rugby game, the annual rugby game we have between the Kiwis and the Roosters. After the game, I went to dinner with my girlfriend, Chelsea, and I didn't feel well. I thought it was the game. We sat down in our booth. She goes, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm just thirsty from rugby. I'm dehydrated." I went to drink out of a straw, and the water went everywhere.
No.
I suffered a stroke that night.
I was just going to say, shit.
And I think that was directly a result of what I've been dealing with for the past 3 years. So the good news is, a year from 1 year later, here I am, 100% recovered. Well, not 100%, 90%. You have a little paralysis in my face and in my left hand, but overall, I'm healthy. And that is one of the results of what I've been dealing with.
Well, Jim, you're a hell of a fighter, man. I know we talked a little bit, and you shared some of your, your life and your situations, and what you're dealing with is, I think, every man absolute nightmare. You survive combat, you make it through deployments, you make it through what we often think is like the worst of the worst, and you come back home, successful entrepreneur, living a great life, raising children, and then you're having to deal with this struggle. And I just want you to know that from the bottom of my heart, brother, you're in my family's prayers. I can't thank you enough for being vulnerable enough to share that, because we often think, like I said earlier, that life is just going to be all, butterflies and rainbows on the outside once we're done, but life continues to happen. And we have to remember that resilience just isn't an easy button you press and then you magically have it. You have to continue working hard and continue to see the positive, continue to say that you are experiencing something difficult, but you can overcome it, that you can eventually get through this. When we see a situation as being hopeless, that there's no way we can overcome it, we don't develop resilience. We don't develop anything out of that. We lose hope. We become depressed. And then we have this, domino effect that actually affects our physical health as well. Takes us in that dark spot. And I think you're a shining example of being willing to understand the reality of a situation, but still fighting for hope, still fighting for resilience and getting through that next day. So thank you for being willing to share that, brother.
Yeah, that's kind of why I did wrote the book and do the podcast, is because the experiences that I had, I think, will help anyone. They transcend race, gender, ethnicity. You don't have to be a veteran. What I'm dealing with, hundreds of thousands of men, women face, each year with the family court system. What I would like to do is say that the resilience that I have now is a byproduct of what I experienced in Desert Storm. Because, let's just go back to Desert Storm. I remember sitting on the breach, and I watched the Bangalore torpedoes go across the minefields in the breach site, and the explosions going on, and we are the first Humvees going across, and we're like, what are we doing? It's like, we're the lead element for 2nd Marine Division, and we're just driving in these Humvees, and we see coming up on Kuwait City, and we got the tanks behind us. They're like, move faster, we're like, and we're encountering Iraqis sporadically, and most of them were surrendering. We had a couple engagements, but nothing huge. And we're just on the outskirts of Kuwait City, and we can see the skyline, and we can see all the high tension wires, and and out of nowhere we start getting fire. And I mean, it's like, this is my first firefight, and it's game on. All of a sudden the training just boom. You act. You train for years, and all of a sudden you're in that situation, and you hope that you are able to react in the way you do it. And for me, it was like game on. And I'm on the 50 cal, and I'm just going to town. Bullets are ricocheting like 10 feet away from me on the metal high tension. Ding, 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 ding. I didn't care. I'm like, yes. Tracers going out, and for some reason I look over. I don't know why. I look out of the corner of my eye, and I see the staff sergeant who I had the issues with jump out of his Humvee and throw his M16 on the ground and hide behind the tire. And I didn't know it was him at the time. I grabbed I'm like, get on the gun. And he's like, and I jump out, run across the desert, kick him. I kicked him as hard as I could. I get the fuck up. And he looks up at me. And when I saw him, I was like, he looked at me, I looked at him. It was like, what? And I run back to the Humvee, and I'm on the gun for about not even 5-10 seconds, and everybody's like, "Ceasefire! Ceasefire! Ceasefire!" Like, so I squeeze out a couple more because that's who I am. Ceasefire! Oh, got this doing.
You're that guy.
I'm that guy. Ceasefire? Oh, okay, sorry. Didn't hear you. You have my earplugs in. Didn't have my ear pro in. And anyway, to get on the radio, and we're figuring out we had to deconflict. We were actually engaging the lead element for 1st Marine Division as we came up. So I write in my journal, like, I don't know if I can find it, but I wrote, today, the world's most elite fighting force engaged the most elite fighting force for 3 minutes of sustained combat. No WIAs, no KIAs. So that was my first combat experience. I'm like engaged with 1st Marine Division. It was hilarious.
Nice.
So then we wound up getting out to the outskirts of Kuwait City. We see the clover leaf of death, and I'm like seeing all this death and destruction. War's over. War is over. But not for me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of loose ends. There was a lot of things that were happening. There I had a charge sheet for the Jack Daniels. I had the issues with the gunny, but there was one other thing that was happening. The entire time I was in Desert Storm, I had dated a female corporal, when I was in the Marines, and we broke up, and she deployed, and I found out that she was in Desert Storm also, and she was assigned to 2nd Marine Division Intel. And once I found out, I was like at Camp 5, I ran into her. Like, she's like, "Sisco." I'm like, "Holy shit, what are you doing here? What are you doing here?" I'm like, this is my dream. And she told me she was an intel, and we were talking, and we had direct mails, back then in country, which was easier. And she would give me intel on our positions. She would give me intel on the enemy, all classified shit. And I got caught with it. And same gunny, he goes into when he found the Jack Daniels, he found all this intel, and takes the lieutenant, same story. Lieutenant's like, "Where'd you get this?" I'm like, "I'm not telling you, sir. It's none of your business." He's like, "Well, I'm going to take this to the CO." And I'm like, "All right, let's go." We go for the walk, go to the headquarters, the COC, the Command Operations Center, go down into the COC, and he gives it to the CO, and he's like, "Corporal Sisco I found this on Corporal Sisco," and he's like, "Hey, Sisco, what's up with this?" And I'm like, "Hey, sir, I know I have a friend who's at 2nd Marine Division in Intel. We've been asking the lieutenant to get us threat briefs. We've been asking for enemy disposition. We've been asking for the locations, the enemy minefields. We don't get any intel." And so I took it upon myself to see if we can get it. And so he starts looking through all these maps and charts and jogs and all of the overlays with the acetate paper, the old shit.
Oh, yeah. The old school stuff. Yeah.
Markers. And, that was the cool shit back then.
Yeah.
We don't have iPads and, anything. And she had to read a map. So anyway, he's looking through this, and he's like, "This stuff's amazing. This is better than I have." And he's like, "Can you get more of this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I just got to drive back to Camp 5 or Camp 15 anytime I want. I can get any, as much as I want." He's like, "Oh, yeah, I want you to go back every week, and I want you to get this stuff." So now I'm like in the praise of the CO. I'm going back once a week, getting these big intel dumps, briefing the teams, bringing it to the CO. So I'm the golden child. The lieutenant hates me. Gunny hates me. They want to fry me. War's over. Belinda was the person who was giving me the intel. Ashley and I break up, obviously, and I'm hurt. And Belinda is there for me. And we start developing a relationship. And, when I go back to Camp 15 after the war, we finally have the opportunity. We have sex, and, we hook up. And it's awesome. I move away from Ashley. I move away from us. I have the intimacy of a woman. I have, the love of a woman in my life. which I've always wanted, and I'm okay. And we are supposed to meet one night outside the women's barracks where our rendezvous site. And she comes out and she's like, I can't see you anymore. I'm like, what? And I'm like, what's going on? And she's like, I love you. I'll always love you. Just walk away. And at this point, I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And I'm like, fuck it. I just turned around and walked away. And I wrote in the journal, it was like a Bogey and Bacall moment. She says, I love you forever. Just walk away. And I'm like, all right, I'm out. And so 26 years later, we connect on Facebook. And through our discussion, she tells me that she was sexually assaulted and raped by some of her staff NCOs in her command. They found out that she was providing me with the intel, and they assaulted her, raped her, and threatened to tell the command that she was giving away classified information to me. And so she had to make a decision whether or not to tell me or not tell me. And I think she did that to protect me in a way, because if she told me that had happened to her with my personality and, everything, she knew that I probably would have tried to take matters into my own hands. So she, kind of gave that ultimatum. And, at that point, with everything that happened with Ashley and, in my life, I just, decided I was going to walk away. And I did. And, that's the tragedy of my Desert Storm deployment. Not only the death of my friend, the betrayal by my girlfriend, but then, this experience a new relationship and have like this hope and have all of that kind of taken away or destroyed. So Desert Storm for me was a very valuable time in my life, in that I learned some really hard lessons and experienced some, I don't want to say trauma because everybody uses that word, but experienced some challenges or traumatic experiences that really had an imprint on my identity and, my life. And
Absolutely.
like I said previously, I wish I had applied those lessons throughout my life, and I didn't.
Yeah. And that's perfect. And what's the name of the book? You got it right there in front of you?
Yeah, it's called The War Journal, A Young Marine's Discovery of Critical Life Lessons from Desert Storm. And it is honestly, it's the journal is transcribed in the book, and I add a bunch of pictures for Marines. I didn't put any crayons in, but and it talks about not only the journal entries, but each journal entry kind of gives you a insight into how that experience. But at the end, I really talk about those critical life lessons. I talk about faith and religion. I talk about education. I talk about relationships and marriage and friendships and finance. And those are the things that I believe can really help young people, even adults, because those are things that you will use throughout your life. And that's kind of the basis behind the book. And it's not one day of war, trigger pulling, and one or two firefights, but it really is about all the life lessons that I've learned.
No, absolutely. And I think that war is the perfect catalyst for all of us to learn so much from it, because life's like perfectly depicted in that entire experience you share with us. All this build up to what you think you're going to experience, and then life hands you something completely different. And that is a powerful lesson a lot of us need to understand, that we can be resilient in, receiving what we think is not what we want, and being angry about it and rallying against it. You just got to be able to deal with the cards you're given. And I think that's the beauty of that book. It really shows us that human side, that Jim that's going through it in that moment, and the lessons he learned. And like you said, if you would have been able to reflect back on those words, on what you experienced later on in life, you realize, oh, wait a second, I've been through this. Yeah. In fact, I've been through these exact situations. If you pause, go to the episode description, you'll see a link where you can pick up the book for yourself. And you'll see it right here in the video on YouTube. Jim, if people want to connect with you and reach out, where can they find you?
I am not a social media influencer. I'm not a content creator. I am just Jim Sisco, and I have no problem giving out my email address and phone number. I'm not directing anybody to a website. And you can't ever contact me. Call me, talk to me. If you have a problem, if you're, I'm going to share one story. So I had just put out the book, and I was still, in this really dark period. And, fortunately, it became a bestseller, and I did a podcast or two, and I did the same thing and put my phone number out there. And I was sitting at night, and you know how it is. The phone rings, and you look at it, and you don't know the
Yeah.
number, and you're like, it's kind of like Russian roulette. Do I pick it up? All right, who knows? I went down, I'm like, I got nothing going on. So I picked up the phone, answered it, good evening, Jim Sisco. And the voice on the other end goes, hi, my name is Steve. And, I hope I don't mind if I'm calling. And I'm like, no, yeah. I'm like, hey, what's going on? He's like, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I saw the podcast and you talked about your book. And I'm like, oh, hey, cool. Thanks. And, he goes, hey, I read your book, and I just wanted to talk to you for a minute and tell you that I really appreciate you writing the book. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. And so he starts telling me that he was in the Army and he did a couple tours in Iraq. And then he starts sharing with me that he was going through a really terrible situation at home and with his family. And he just blatantly said, I was thinking about ending my life and committing suicide. And I'm like, I didn't really know what to do. I mean, I have been in the same situation as him. I've had those thoughts. And, so I didn't really, was kind of like, didn't know what to say. And I'm like, well, I mean, great. You read my book. And he goes, no, I read your book and I changed my mind. It gave me purpose. It gave me meaning. And he said, if you can go through what you went through and going through what you're going through, I can deal with what I'm dealing with. And I was like, that's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. I didn't know what to say. And, we spoke a couple different times after that, but it really hit me. If I can help one person, I've done my job. And if I can help 100 people, I've done a great service to humanity and to the world. And that's what drives me, and that's what motivates me, and it's not royalties. I think Amazon gets like $14 for every book, and I can make like $3, so I'm not trying to make a fortune on this. I just cover the cost of production, but it really is the purpose of the book. And so I put out my phone number, put out my email, and anybody wants to just shoot me an email or give me a call if you need to talk. I'll help you in any way I can.
Absolutely, Jim. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you being vulnerable enough to share your story with our audience. And I cannot wait to have you back on the show, because I know there's more that you can share with us. And I know there's got to be more stories and more hidden gems in there. So, Jim, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for what you're doing. And to all y'all listening, go get the book. And more importantly, share the show. Help us grow. Send out this episode, share it with a friend, and like, follow, subscribe, all that jazz, because we can't grow without your support. So thank you for what you're doing, and we'll see you all next time. Till then, take care. If you like what we're doing and you're enjoying the show, don't forget to share us, like us, subscribe.